St. Peter's Lutheran is a pretty much blended racially. It's about 10% white and about 40–50% black, Caribbean basin, and about 30% Latino. Then we have people from Bangladesh as well. So we have people from about 20 islands, 25 islands and countries in the Central, South America, Caribbean basin range, plus some Asians from Bangladesh. And then some remnant old-time white people like me. When I hear the term gentrification, it has a negative connotation because it means that it's a class problem, that there's going to be a different class of people coming into a community, and they're going to upgrade in the way of thinking that class. So for me, I'm a working class guy. My dad was a working class guy. I've been among working class and working poor people for my entire ministry. So I view gentrification through that lens, that it feels like something's going to happen where I can't afford to be where I was. When I hear the term racism, I apply it immediately to people who are in my pastoral care. People who have been, because they're black, because they're brown, because they're Latino, because they're from the Caribbean, because they're African American, have had less opportunity, have been profiled, have had opportunity taken from them just because of their skin color, and have systematically been excluded from opportunities that other people get. It's a highly offensive term to me, and one I have lived inside of for my whole life. And I've been over in East New York for 40 years, and the amount of times I get pulled over, and I get stopped, and I get frisked remains zero. Whether I have my collar on or not, it's not going to affect it. I'm not going to get bothered. Whereas my parishioners, especially young adult males, have constantly been harassed or given a difficult time. That's just on profiling. What more is offensive to me is the fact that educationally it's harder to get a fair shake. Our school system in the poorer areas is not at the same level. And as many charter schools as you can put in, it still remains difficult to get a quality education. And that doesn't mean that families don't care, which gets read out racially, that black and brown families do not care. I don't have that perception at all. In fact, I think the overwhelming majority of black and Latino families care at the same rate or even a higher rate about those kids. They just can't get a fair shake because there's an inherent racism in the system. White privilege, I often think of myself. So I'm one of those guys, and I think that I can behave and act in a certain way and receive a better treatment along the way. White privilege, however, to me, has to do with this whole concept of gentrification. And that means that when gentrification takes place, the arriving group of people who are privileged either because of their economic status in advance or are given certain bonuses as they arrive are going to get a better deal in the gentrified neighborhood, are going to make it into something that they can purchase, and maybe even purchase that name. So now East New York, which means a lot to me, say I'm from East New York, say I'm from Cypress Hills, can eventually become some commodity that somebody else who just bought their way into the neighborhood now wears that t-shirt. It doesn't work that way, and that's wrong, and that has to do with white privilege. I think it also has to do with the opportunities when it comes to justice, and when it comes to receiving good treatment in the justice system, whether it has to do with having lawyers, understanding the legal consequences and being worked with through the legal consequences. I see the justice system as having major flaws in the area of white privilege. And we've seen it over and over again in what happens to our kids in my church. White supremacy to me is just a code word for the ultimate forms of racism that exist in the country that go back to Ku Klux Klan and all of that nastiness. White supremacy is something that politically gets read out differently in different communities. And I've always been thankful to live in New York where there is a blend, where there is not a homogeneous group. When I think of white supremacy, I often think of it in terms of homogeneous parts of the country where people can still get away with using that kind of terminology or with having those attitudes. And although I don't think you could say that New York is a home base for white supremacists, it can be a home base for racist people on the Anglo side of the coin. You know, and I get to see, because we are so diverse in our church and in our community, the way race plays out across other lines, the way people see one another who are Asian versus black, or Latino versus black, or black versus Latino. So there's a whole rainbow thing going on there. But in our country, the systemic nature of it has to do with white and versus anyone else, and has to do with taking a position that I am inherently entitled to the supreme position. And that, of course, goes totally counter to my religious beliefs. God, it says in the book of Acts, is no respecter of persons. And the way I look at that, God loves us all, irrespective. However, God also does not like, and it is not in God's just plan for all of God's children not to be treated equally and the same. Could I afford to live in Brooklyn if I weren't in the position I'm in, and have been in at least as a bishop and a pastor? Could I afford to live in East New York? Would I have ever chosen to live in East New York? That's a tough question, and I think the honest answer is, when I came to East New York, it was a neighborhood in transition. This is way back now in the 70s. It was a neighborhood in transition from white to non-white. And I would have fit in as sort of a community organizing type young guy who wanted to make a base in a place that was diverse, because I've always enjoyed diversity. Whether or not I would have participated in the white flight that took place back then, I kind of doubt it because of the way I am. But I would say this: to stay in a neighborhood when it's in decline means you're going to take the hit when it comes to the value of your house, and you're going to take the hit when it comes to the crime in your neighborhood and all the other social indicators. So I can say, from my own perspective, we have chosen to stay in New York. We have chosen to stay working in Brooklyn. I live in Queens. And we have chosen to say it's the best thing of all is to live in that diverse setting. When it comes to the future of our neighborhood, Cypress Hills, East New York, and the future viability of a congregation that is multiracial, and the ability of a church community to withstand all of the movement of economics that happens when there's a rezone, such as there is, and how that plays in to the rezone as it is now being proposed, that East New York is the #1 place, and all the rest of them will kind of fall into place after that, all the rest of the rezoning neighborhoods. It's very important for us to be as strong as we can to provide the adequate subsidies that it's going to take and the adequate measures that it's going to take to provide jobs for the people in a neighborhood where the unemployment rate has remained high, so that they can stay in the neighborhood because they have those jobs even as new housing is built. That the affordable nature of the rents and the ownership remains at a level that sustains the people who already live there. And that's all we have ever, no one here is saying change isn't going to happen. We embrace change. I'm one of the leaders of a group that built 4,000 homes in East New York, Brownsville, called the Nehemiah Homes. And that's when the neighborhood was burned to the ground, one of the most overarching negative impact neighborhoods in the United States in the 60s and early 70s. And yet we stayed and we rebuilt. And so if in a rezoning, the template includes anti-displacement measures so that people who already live there can stay affordable and rent, and that's monitored. And they're not only legal measures, but also subsidy measures to make sure that those folks' rent doesn't skyrocket. And so owners can be given the kind of subsidies that allow them to build a basement apartment and have another tenant, and therefore stay in the neighborhood they want to stay in, that they always have been in. And then the affordability metrics are viewed not as a way to keep the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year person there, but to address the great group of people who are at the bottom of that level, the $12,000 to $30,000 a year income producers in Cypress Hills and East New York. They have to be honored in this thing. So if those 3 or 4 major things are done, job placement, anti-displacement, and then affordability at a real level, then we will have done what we need to do so that Cypress Hills remains what it is. Otherwise, it's going to be Bushwick number 2. It's going to be Williamsburg number 3. It's going to be Bed-Stuy number 4. We'll just be the same as the rest that are being swept over in the tide of economic speculation by developers and others who seek great profit at the expense of the people living there. If gentrification were a criminal, and I had to point the finger at it, who would I point it towards? I would point it toward developers. And then maybe I would say, who's the one enabling the developer? And that would have to be the political structure. If the political structure is dominated by development and real estate interests, then the political structure does not serve the people. It serves only those special interests. So you know who's behind it is the people trying to make a ton of money. You know who's in front of it is the people saying it's okay. They need to make their money, and they're who counts first.